I want to welcome everybody to joining in for this wonderful opportunity to have Rick Ahrens entertain us and intrigue us with his stories about Hawaii birds. And we are going to have a hiatus over the summer, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And so we do have just a few announcements we can put up to get us started to launch the program. And so one of the first ones I want to remind people, we've been asking in the newsletter, we don't see you in person so much anymore to try to cajole and ask people if they're interested in volunteering, but we do always have a need for volunteers. And there's two positions that we really could use help with right now. One is the Audubon Adventures Coordinator, which is a wonderful educational program, and there's some moving parts to it, but it's a pretty well-defined position. So if anyone's interested in helping us with that, you can call me or email me, or we'll come around to talking one way or another. So please consider that a volunteer position. The other volunteer position is what I'm calling office help, because there's a lot of needs that we have for people to help do certain specific tasks that would be considered sort of office type tasks, but we don't have an office. So we need somebody who has their own computer and the ability to do both email and some hard copy mailing for us for thank yous and things like that. So if you're interested in helping out, please contact me. All of my contact information is on the website or the newsletter, or one way or another you can find me. So that's our first announcement. And then another piece of business we're going to do tonight is our board elections. We only usually do it once a year, and we got out of our normal sequence last year because we didn't have programs in May last year, so we did it in the fall, but we thought we should get back to our time frame of doing it in March. And so very quickly, just those of you, we right now have 46 people on logged in, 46 computers logged in. And so we're primarily asking those of you who are members to participate in the voting process. And we'll do that. You can literally raise your hand and we can scan and look and see if we do get positive response when we ask for one. And so the list of names are here, and we do have a constitution with bylaws that cover this election process. So we need to do it every year since we are a nonprofit. We want to have our board elected by the membership. So as those of you who, I will ask you, once you read the slate of names, Ramiro, Rachel, Jim, Ron, Deborah, Mava, and Rebecca, all of these are incumbent. And so they've been doing this for a while. So I will ask for a motion. If anybody will make a move that we proceed with the election of this slate of candidates. Anybody willing to do that out there?
I so move.
Okay, Dick Lamster moved. Do I have a second? I see Pat Blue Heron seconding. Okay, thank you. And so it has been moved and seconded that the slate of nominees be elected. And so again, if you're a Lane County Audubon member, please raise your hand to elect these members. I see several hands out there. And so there's some people I can't see, but I think we probably do have a successful election that just occurred. Thank you, everybody. And congratulations to the board members. Thank you. Now, Debbie, do we have some other announcements?
Yeah, I just kind of, this is way too full of text, but really for me, I just wanted to remind people we're all excited to get back outside and to get back in our gardens. And just a reminder to keep the birds in mind when you're gardening. If you can put any plants this spring, consider planting native vegetation. They're easier to maintain because they're adapted for this climate, and they provide so much for the birds, nectar and fruit and nuts and seeds and insects and shelter. If you can avoid it, please don't use pesticides in the yard. We know that they have ill effects for birds and other critters. Turn off unnecessary lighting, keep your lights shielded so we're not messing with migratory birds or birds that are active at night. Keep it a little messy. Birds like brush piles and snags as places for shelter and food. And on the opposite side of that, don't be messy when it comes to your bird feeders and water sources. Please remember to keep them clean. It's pretty simple to clean the feeders, immerse them for a couple of minutes in a solution of 1 part plain old chlorine bleach to about 9 parts water, then let them air dry, and that will take away pretty much anything that might harm the birds. So just a reminder to plant for the birds and have fun out in the garden this spring. I'm going to turn it over to Dennis in a moment, who's going to make some announcements about our program meetings. We're looking forward to fall program meetings, and we thought we could get some input from all of you. We don't know what the program meetings will look like in the fall, and by that I mean we don't know if we'll be moving back to the garden club and having our program meetings in person, or if we'll need to continue with Zoom. So we'd like to get some input from you. I'm going to try and launch this poll. And basically the poll is asking you to just choose one of these. Are you hesitant to attend live in-person meetings and would prefer to keep the Zoom format? Or would you prefer to meet in person at the Garden Club for program meetings in the fall? So where's your comfort level? We're just looking for some input from our members. Obviously, we'll need to make our decision based on regulations and, you know, as much information as we can get in the fall, but we'd like to know where you guys are at. So again, the poll should be appearing on your screen somewhere. You can choose one of these options. It looks like a little more than half of you were able to vote in. I'll give it a few more seconds if anybody else wants to do that. And I'm actually going to just kind of share the results with you. You can see that we're kind of, you know, fairly evenly split, with some of us preferring to stay with the Zoom format and others of us hoping to be able to meet in person. Again, we will keep you posted. Stay tuned for announcements before our September meeting, and hopefully we'll have it all figured out by then. And I'm going to turn it over to Dan.
Well, I want to tell you a little bit about the fall. I have a couple of speakers lined up. First of all, you recognize Ram Papish there. Ram has agreed to do another meeting for us, another program. He hopes that it will be about the Pantanal, but he's not sure if that trip is going to go or not. It is in Brazil, and Brazil's COVID situation isn't looking too good right now. But in any case, we will have Ram, even though it may not be about the Pantanal. And also, I have Gina Roberti. She is from Mount St. Helens. She's the Science Education Coordinator for the Mount St. Helens Institute. And she's going to do a program for us about the birds of Mount St. Helens. I also got some feeders out to a couple of other people, so we should have a nice group of speakers for the fall. So let me tell you a little bit about tonight, though. Tonight, Rick grew up in Ohio in a birding family before moving to Oregon in 1981. He has done lots of the Lane County Audubon Society programs. We believe this is his 6th program. So that might be some kind of record. Actually, we'll check that. It's certainly in the top 5. So very good, Rick. We're glad to have you back. Rick calls himself a naturalist. He does have kind of a focus on bugs and birds and ecology. Otherwise, he's pretty much a generalist, and that's what we like. So tonight, he's going to take us to some isolated islands out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It kind of makes you think of the Galapagos Islands. And it is in a lot of ways very similar. The birds on islands and situations like this become very unique.
Oh,
and Rick is going to be telling us all about these great birds in the great islands in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So take it over, Rick.
Thanks, Dennis. And thanks to Debbie for helping out with all the technical aspects. And of course, thanks to Mava and Dick for all that they do for Lane County Audubon, and for all of you for showing up tonight. This is not unusual for me to babble for about an hour sitting on my couch in my living room. So you know, I'm assuming there's people out there taking this in. I also wanted to acknowledge the Aina, the land of Hawaii, and its beauty and its uniqueness, and the Kanaka Maoli, the original people of Hawaii, who have preserved and protected the land for generations. And I would also like to thank my kupuna, my grandmother, who got our family interested in birding. And I like to start off slideshows with this particular slide. This is me at age 6. And my father, just to remind people, if you have kids, grandkids, you know, get them away from the screens, get them out, you know, into nature somewhere. And you never know what might happen. My brother and I, because of my grandmother, have a lifelong interest in birds. So I also wanted to say up front that I'm not an expert on Hawaiian birds, but they say if you want to learn something, do a slide presentation on it. So I've learned a lot in the last couple of years preparing this. And also beginning on, in 2017, Hawaiian birds can be counted on your life list, according to the ABA. So if you're badly stalled, you know, on your North American list, which I was for years, you can go to Hawaii and add some birds legally now. They did this to encourage support for conservation on the islands, and you will see why shortly. So here's the basic outline of what I plan on talking about tonight. Briefly talk about geology and geography, some island biogeography, which is an interesting notion. And then the heart of the presentation is on the Hawaiian honeycreepers and the seabirds in the archipelago. And here again, the archipelago meaning all the islands in the Hawaiian chain. And if time permits, I'll do some stuff on introduced birds as well, because Hawaii is also the introduced bird capital of the world. It's very interesting in that regard. So most people are familiar with the major islands in Hawaii, you know, the Big Island, Maui, Oahu, Kauai. But a lot of people don't realize how extensive and ancient the entire chain is. You can see it goes all the way up to the Kamchatka Peninsula, you know, almost 4,000 miles, and has been around for maybe 85 million years. It's really extensive. It's basically a hot spot with the Pacific plate moving over it. And so that's why you get continual volcanoes. There's maybe 80 different volcanoes in the chain, of which there's still a few active ones, obviously on the Big Island, and even a new island forming off of the Big Island. So this is a look at what they call the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, which are really important for breeding seabirds. There's maybe 14 million seabirds of 22 different species that nest on what they call the Leeward Islands or the northwestern chain. And in 2006, George W. Bush made it a marine national monument. It's Papahanau Mo Kuakea. And then it was expanded actually in 2016 by Obama. So it's really extensive and very interesting, and I'll talk more about it in some of the birds that actually breed on that part of the islands. Here again, they're much older, you know, Midway might be 28 million years old, and so they're very worn down and very low, which is important too, because they're susceptible to sea level rising. And there's a lot of birds nesting on there, so we'll talk some about that. Another aspect of the geography is that the trade winds and therefore the moisture comes from the northeast, and therefore you have a wet side and a dry side to the islands. Not unlike here in Oregon, you know, where we have a wet side and a dry side to the state. So that creates some diversity. And then of course the cultural aspects as well. It's pretty phenomenal, the journeys that people have made for thousands of years to find all these islands and to bring things that would sustain them. And you know, just amazing voyages that were made with very little technology. So island biogeography is an idea that the theory of island biogeography, the book on the left was put out in 1967 by Robert MacArthur and E.O. Wilson, which many people are familiar with. And it basically looks at the factors that affect species richness and diversity on isolated natural communities. And so islands give clarity to evolution because they're isolated, which is essential to speciation, to be isolation, a limited area, and they're simplified ecosystems. So a lot of famous naturalists, obviously Darwin, Alfred Russel Wallace, Joseph Hooker, all studied species on islands and came up with a lot of the ideas for adaptive radiation, natural selection, and evolution from islands. And the Hawaiian Islands, this is Kauai, which is the oldest of the large islands, and you can see how weathered it is. It might be 5 million years old. And so Hawaii has, it's warm, wet, and steep, and therefore that enhances the biological richness. And you get a lot of canyons, lava flows, ridges, and divisions. So you get a lot of microhabitats that also encourage the diversity. And why are islands important? Well, this is what our natural world looks like. These are just national parks, but you can see they are islands. They're pretty isolated. And so, you know, a lot of our, well, actually probably most of our ecosystem is fragmented in various ways. Even public lands. The orange is the BLM, the green is the Forest Service. And we all know that these are not large intact areas of land. They're pretty fragmented and impacted. So that's why the idea of island biogeography is interesting, not just for islands. So I think most people have heard of Darwin's finches. This is a great piece of art that you can actually buy. It's really kind of neat. And the idea is that on the Galapagos Islands, there was a founder bird species that arrived 2 to 3 million years ago, and there were all these niches available. And so the species evolved into 14 or so different species. And even though they look like finches, technically they're tanagers, but that's for another night, another talk. So here again, and Darwin didn't even mention the finches in his Origin of Species, so we're not sure how important it was, you know, to his thinking. But it's been associated with him. But people have not heard of the Hawaiian honeycreepers. Here again, there was an ancestor, a rose finch, something related to our house finch, that maybe a group got blown off course and ended up on the Hawaiian Islands maybe 5 to 7 million years ago. And these evolved into an incredible array of more than 50 species of honeycreepers. You know, very diverse, very colorful, honestly, much more interesting than Darwin's finches. So that's the good news. The bad news is that there's only 18 of them still alive, and many are declining. There's really only a couple that are actually in good shape, and we'll get into the reasons for that coming up. So, and people have done, you know, a lot of genetic research on when they, you know, when species split off, but that's not for tonight. So one of the main reasons that birds are having trouble is mosquitoes. There's no native mosquitoes, no native ants on the Hawaiian Islands. And mosquitoes showed up in the 1820s, and now there's 7 different species. And shortly thereafter, avian pox, which is also called bumblefoot. It's a disease that birds get, and they get growths on their feet and on their eyes and in any part that's unfeathered. And it can cause them a lot of problems. And so that happened pretty soon after the mosquitoes arrived. And then in the early 1900s, avian malaria arrived. They're not sure exactly, you know, probably came in casks of water for ships. And the malaria then affects the birds. And so there's really almost no native birds below 4,500 feet now. It's you know, a tragic situation because there were honey creepers all over the island, and now they're limited to the higher realms, and a lot of the islands are not that high. And so there's just a very limited range where the honey creepers can be, along with a couple of other native birds that aren't honey creepers. And the malaria probably arrived on non-native birds. The birds that were brought in and introduced for various reasons. So this is the more depressing stuff, and then we'll get to some pretty pictures of birds here. That here again, this includes all the native land birds. That a lot of species actually went extinct, pre-Captain Cook, and the rest of them are not doing very well. They're threatened or endangered. So there's a couple of birds that have actually been able to develop some resistance to the avian malaria. That would be the amakihi, which is, there's 3 different species on different islands of this. They're a fairly common bird. You can see interesting beak. They use their nectar. That is one of their food sources. And here this is a native tree called the mamame, and they actually kind of can open it up with their bill and get the nectar out. This is a different species on Oahu. And so here are the 3 different species. The only one that's having trouble is the one on Kauai. So there's kind of minor differences between them, but they split them into 3 different species. And then of course, there's a couple of bright red birds that are really emblematic. The apapane is one, and a very important tree for a lot of these honey creepers is the ohia. And so you see a lot of the birds on these trees, and it's a very widespread tree. The apapane also are very vocal, as are a number of the honey creepers. And I can imagine what it would be like, what it would have been like, 200 or 300 years ago, just the cacophony of sound from all the different honey creepers. Now there's certain places you can go and hear, a few of them, but I can imagine what it was like at one time. So these are ohia trees, a keystone species that's a little unusual in the tropics to have a dominant tree, but the ohia and the koa are both fairly dominant on the Hawaiian Islands. One of the problems, though, is there's a fungus that came in maybe 10 or 15 years ago that causes rapid ohia death, and it's kind of spread to about 100,000 acres on the Big Island, and so they're really concerned about this because the ohia can grow on bare lava. As soon as the volcanoes erupt, the ohia trees can actually colonize and produce lots of nectar and for birds and insects. They come in a variety of colors. And this is sort of the emblematic bird, the EEV, the scarlet honey creeper. Here again, they're only threatened, which is unusual for one of the Hawaiian birds, but they are declining, and just a remarkable looking bird. Here again, this is on a mamame at Hosmer Grove, which is one of the best places to go to see some of the honey creepers that's on Maui. Also very vocal. You know when they're around. And obviously very evolved to use some of the native plants. This is called a Maui creeper. This is the most difficult of the 4 to find it at Hosmer Grove. It's much smaller, but it's also an endangered endemic. And Hosmer Grove is right as you go into Haleakala Park. You go off to the left, and this was an experimental forest. Here again from the 1920s, the Haleakala got grazed by cattle and goats and all kinds of introduced ungulates, and so they tried to plant maybe 80 species of trees there. Ralph Hosmer, who was a forester, and there's still quite a few left. You can see here these are eucalyptus trees, and so they're trying to plant a lot of the native trees in there as well. And right next to that is actually a nature conservancy preserve, which has 2 other much more rare honey creepers, but it's a little bit hard to get access to it. You have to book way ahead to go in there. And I put this slide up here just to show you, if you go to Hawaii, you can, there's a lot of information online. Just Google like birding Maui and you'll get all these different sites and what birds you can see and where you can see them. So, so it's really, it's difficult to find the birds, but it's not difficult to find the places to go to put yourself in a position to hopefully see the birds. This is kind of an interesting one here. This is one I found that, I don't know if you can hear that, the crested honeycreeper. And the name is the Akoikoi, which is Akoikoi. A lot of the Hawaiian names come from what the bird says. This is actually what they look like. I just bought that because it supported the recovery efforts for this particular bird, but there might be 3,500 of them left on Maui. And they're in the Nature Conservancy Preserve, which is a great place. They've done a lot of restoration there. There's 12 native birds that they are trying to protect there. And there's one other bird there too. This is a wooden carving from the Bishop Museum, because I didn't see these. There's only 150 of these left, the Maui parrotbill. And they have this specialized bill for kind of taking off bark and crushing twigs to get insect larvae out. So they're very unique. It would be really interesting to actually see one. And they're doing some captive breeding programs. They might start next year. So there's a lot they're doing, but they're just right on the edge right now. This is another one that's on the Hawaii island only, that has a very unique bill. And they use the lower bill to actually chisel, and then the upper bill to kind of probe for insect larvae. And these occupy the woodpecker niche in on the Hawaiian Islands. And there might be 1,500 of these left. And here again, there's a couple of places you can see them, open to the public, and a couple other places that you have to get special permission to go with the group to see them. So here, just a little recap of different bills, and evolved to occupy different niches, since there wasn't a lot of competition when the ancestors of these arrived on the Hawaiian Islands. There is one kind of finch-billed honeycreeper left, the Palila, which is on a very limited range on the Big Island. And there may be 2,000 of these left. Here again, the usual suspects: rats, cats, sheep, invasive plants, and even fire. There's a grass that's almost like cheatgrass that in the West that encourages fires. So so there's a lot of problems, but they're kind of hanging in there. And they're dependent on the mamame tree as well for seeds and some caterpillars inside. And here you can see the historic range and the current range. It's only on one of the sides of Mauna Kea that the Palila are still around. And then there's a place on Kauai called the Alakai Wilderness Preserve, or sometimes just the Alakai Swamp. It's about 9,000 acres, and it's actually right on top of Kauai. It's a caldera, and it's has several very rare Hawaiian honeycreepers. I went up there a couple of times, and it's really hard to find anything there. And you really have to worry about getting lost if you wander too far off the trails too. So, and you can see down below, they have fenced off a lot of it. There's 2,000 acres, maybe by now 3,000 acres that they fenced off from pigs, which are a big problem, and a lot of the other ungulates. And so that, helps the native birds. But it's one of the rainiest places on the planet. So you're lucky to have a nice day if you go there. And it's this really slippery red clay that you're up and down on the trail. So it's not for the faint of foot. It's quite an adventure to hike. And then you actually hike down into the caldera although these were being replaced on this nice redwood boardwalk that can be kind of slippery too. It's interesting that on the Hawaiian Islands, there's no precious metal and no precious stones. And so to show your, your wealth and your prestige, they used bird feathers. And so they made these elaborate cloaks that had hundreds of thousands of feathers on each cloak. And obviously the red was from the Eevee and the Apapani that I showed you. The yellow was from a couple of other birds that sadly are now extinct. And apparently there were special bird catchers who actually used a sticky latex from a plant to catch the birds, and they would take some feathers off and then release the birds. So, so these were quite elaborate capes that that were used by the Ali'i, the royal people of Hawaii. And these are a couple of the birds where they got the yellow feathers from that are no longer around. And this is in Honolulu, the Iolani Palace. And let me see, I think I can actually maybe point here, maybe not. Anyway, on the side of the thrones, there's these big white things and there's big yellow things. And these are called kahili. There's a whole room in the Bishop Museum on this, the kahili room that shows these. These were kind of standards, like flags indicating, power and status, and made from bird feathers. Some of the big white ones were actually made from albatross, and some of the other ones from various other birds. So there's a lot of these were around as well. And there's several other birds that weren't honey creepers. This is from a monarch flycatcher, the Elapaio, and there's 3 different species on 3 different islands there. This was a juvenile, and they're sort of tame, and they're also a guardian spirit of canoe makers. They lead people who are looking to make canoes out of koa trees to good solid koa trees, as opposed to ones that are not good to use. They're very cute little birds, sort of common, but hard to find. And usually by the time you find them, you're losing light and it's starting to rain, which was the condition in here. Fortunately, I borrowed a few slides from Kerry Kirst, who was very helpful. He gave me some pointers on different places to go in the island, since he's been there numerous times, and he has a much better camera. So this is a nice adult Kauai Elapaio. This is an Oahu Elapaio. This is another one of mine. And you can see he has lots of jewelry on. So there's not many of these left. And so they're pretty extensively studied. They're getting a little bit of immunity. This is pretty low on Oahu to the avian malaria, but they're still not doing that great. There's another family of birds, the thrushes, which is in the same family as our robin, the oma'o, the Hawaiian thrush, and relatively common. They're very important for dispersing seeds of native plants, since just like robins here, they will eat a lot of the fruits and disperse them. And so that's on the big island. And then on the island of Kauai is the small Kauai thrush, which is critically endangered. There may only be 500 birds left. And so these, needless to say, are hard to find. And here again, these would be up in the Alakai. So anyway, that was a lot of information just right out of the gate here. So we'll take a little breather and take in some nice Kona blue color here in the ocean, and remind you that there's plenty more to do in Hawaii than go to look for birds, which 99% of the people do other things than look for birds. Fish are great, the great coral reefs, amazing fish in certain locations. Here again, many endemic fish. Dolphins, when you get out, you can see the spinner dolphins that actually do acrobatics, is why they're called spinner dolphins. Humpback whales, maybe 10,000 or more winter, come down because it's a warmer water and fairly shallow around Maui. The islands there are fairly shallow, so that's where the females come to calve. And of course, the honu, the green sea turtles are great. These are fairly common, and they haul out and sun themselves, and just a lot of fun to see. You might even get lucky and find a giant Hawaiian darner, the largest dragonfly in the United States. There's 26 native species and subspecies of dragonflies and damselflies on the Hawaiian Islands. Or fruit flies. You know, if you're really into studying small things, there's 600 species of fruit flies on Hawaii, just to show how, you know, evolution and adaptation can work. 1/5 of all the species in the world of fruit flies. So if you haven't seen enough on your compost bucket, you know, in the summertime, you can go to Hawaii and see some real ones. This is on pineapple, you know, so if you sit there, you know, not eating your pineapple for long enough, you might find a new species of fruit fly. So now we'll get into the next section here, is the seabirds, which are really incredible, you know, incredible travelers. Just their life stories are just amazing. And one of the best places to go is Kilauea Point on the island of Kauai. I saw 5 out of 6 of these birds, and the 5 out of 6 actually nest there as well. The frigate bird is the only one that doesn't nest there. It nests out on the northwestern chain. But it's a small area. It's only about 200 acres and has extensive predator-proof fencing to protect the birds that nest there. There have been 27 seabird species that have been seen there. So it's a phenomenal place to go. And I actually went there several days just to see what was there. And here again, different ones nest at different times. One of my favorites is the mole, the Laysan albatross. And here again, this is a bird you can see off the Oregon coast at certain times if you're lucky. They travel that far, the non-breeders. Have a very extensive range where they go to feed. Just beautiful birds. It's fun to watch them just fly right overhead. It's really amazing. And they also nest. There's about 200 that nest on the island of Kauai. And this is right in somebody's backyard, you know, just right on the ground, which here again is not to their benefit because, you know, dogs cause them problems and various other things. Fortunately on Kauai, there's no mongoose like on the other islands. And so that's, you know, one of the saving graces of a lot of the nesting seabirds. And so just to show where this nest is, there's the arrow pointing to it. There's a golf course on the left and the birds are on the right there. So they nest just right out in the open, really don't make much of a nest. The majority of them nest actually on Midway and Kure atolls, you know, way out at the other end of the Hawaiian chain. But here again, they're really vulnerable there because of sea level rise and hurricanes and various other things. So they're trying to translocate and move some of the birds to some of the other islands, particularly Kauai and Oahu. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And here's the star Laysan albatross, Wisdom, who was banded in 1956 by Chandler Robbins. And this year, once more in March, had a chick. So it's just a great story, heartwarming, and just amazing birds. So that's kind of good news of the albatross. The bad news, there's just a lot of junk out in the ocean. And unfortunately, the albatross, in getting food for their babies, a lot of times the plastic looks like, squid or fish. And so almost all the baby albatross have some plastics in them, some enough to kill them. The good news is that healthy chicks actually can cough up a pellet at 4 months and expel a lot of the plastic. But here again, plastics are a big problem with a lot of the seabirds. So yeah, amazing wingspan on these, maybe 7 feet or more on the mole, the Laysan albatross. There's other albatross that nest on the Northwest Islands, the black-footed albatross, which is probably the most common one off the Oregon coast. And you really don't have to go far off of Newport to see them, maybe 10 miles or so to the continental shelf. And phenomenal flyers. They do, well, actually, I'll get to that in a second. Here's the range of the black-footed albatross. Like I said, the majority of them nest on the northwest chain of the Hawaiian Islands. Some of them nest over in Japan. but you can see the range, non-breeding. They travel really extensively. And the way they travel is called dynamic soaring, where they'll actually turn into the wind and get some lift and go up. And then as they go down, they actually gain speed. And they can just keep doing that, hour after hour, and fly, for days that way. And it's really neat to watch. That's the good news. The bad news is if there's no wind, they can't fly. They're not really good flappers. Their wings are too long. So that's why the majority of albatross are in the southern oceans, because there's a lot more predictable wind down there. And if you're really lucky off the Oregon coast, you can see a short-tailed albatross. This was on a pelagic back in 2017. And it's just the juveniles that show up off the Oregon coast. This was about 32 miles off of Newport. And so this was a juvenile that was just flying back and forth, by the boat that we were in. And it was really interesting to watch. A bird with kind of a sad history, they nest over in Japan, and there was industrial hunting where they killed as many as 5 million birds in 17 years for food, for feathers, for eggs, for all kinds of stuff. And in the 1950s, there was only about 50 of them left. They actually thought they were extinct at one point, but apparently there were some juveniles. The juveniles take 3 to 5 years out at sea. And so they came back and started nesting again. And so now they're protected. And they're coming back to some extent. You can see here on the left, the Turishima Islands is the main nesting spot for the short-tailed albatross. And then the other dots are where they're seen sometimes. There also have been a couple of pairs that have nested on Midway. So that would be, good to have more than one breeding location. So just a little bit about albatross. There's 22 species. They're all species of concern because here again on islands, there's rats, cats, plastic pollution, longline fishing takes out a lot of them, rising sea levels, and the decline in forage fish. Like I said, most are in the southern hemisphere. It's hard to actually cross between the two because of the doldrums. And they're amazing birds. They actually use celestial, chemical, and olfactory cues. The tube noses have a really good sense of smell, which are the fulmars and the albatross. And so they use that to navigate and to find food. And they spend most of their lives at sea. They only come to land to nest, to feed their babies, and so don't spend much time on land. And so the Pacific Rim Conservation is a really good nonprofit, and they want to create some new nesting colonies for both the laysan and the black-footed in areas where they're higher up and less prone to tsunamis and sea level rise. So they actually get small birds, and they have to hand feed them for 5 months, and they really imprint on a location. And so, hopefully they will, when they come back in a few years to nest, they will come back to, Kauai and Oahu. And so far this group has translocated 200 different seabirds of 6 different species. And also, if you're wondering about what kind of fish to eat, what are sustainable, there's a really good website by the Monterey Bay Aquarium called Seafood Watch. So you can Google that, and that will give you some good information because it's difficult. There's certain fish you should not eat. So some more seabirds. Tropic birds are pretty common, really around the tropics, but also on the islands. This is about as good a picture as I got of one. You see them, but they're usually distant. This is a much nicer picture that Carrie took. They have these long tails. So there's the white-tailed tropic birds, and then this is a red-tailed tropic bird. And this one was off of Kilauea Point, and it was displaying and just going right back and forth right in front of me. So it was really, amazing to watch. And they're kind of plunge divers like some of the other birds. Also on Oahu is a good place to see some seabirds. This is a place about noon where tropic birds actually do a whole display, and you can watch them, doing interesting flight behaviors. There's a couple different species of boobies, which is kind of a strange word, but it actually comes from the Spanish bobo, meaning stupid, because they were easily caught and eaten by sailors. They would land on ships, or you could just walk right up to them, at their breeding colonies. So that's how they got that name. But you can get pretty close to them. Like I said, this is the red-footed on here in Kilauea Point on Kauai. And they use the red feet, or there's blue-footed ones too, in their mating displays. So they're interesting birds. They actually were nesting here in these casuarina trees, which are from Australia. All those white things there are actually birds. There's about 2,000 in this colony. And here again, it's protected, from cats, rats, and other predators. So they're doing fairly well here. Brown boobies, this is a juvenile. Here's an adult. They also plunge dive to catch fish. They can swim underwater chasing fish. And then these guys, which are really cool to watch, frigate birds. And this is a different species if you're used to the ones in Florida and along the Gulf Coast. And the Hawaiian word is iwa, which means thief. And it's very appropriate because they're kleptoparasites. They will chase gulls and chase boobies, chase tropic birds, and get them to disgorge their fish. And then they can actually fly down and catch them a lot of times before it even hits the water. They're amazing flyers. They have the lowest wing loading, which means the wing surface area to weight. They have a really light weight, and they can fly for weeks at a time. So they're really fun to watch. This is a female. The males have the big kind of red throat pouches. I didn't see any when I was there. And they nest out on the northwest chain there. So if you're on Oahu, there's a really good, a couple of different places you can go to see seabirds. There's an island across here called Banana Island, which is a seabird sanctuary. And there's 10,000 wedge-tailed shearwaters, 80,000 sooty terns, 20,000 brown noddies, some bulrus petrels and tropic birds, and even some Hawaiian monk seals. They're on that island. Here again, the rats, the cats, what used to be a lot of rabbits are all gone. And so, it's back to seabirds. And one reason seabirds are so important on islands is because they're like salmon. Salmon bring, all these nutrients from the ocean up the rivers, and then they're dispersed in the Northwest forests. Well, same with the seabirds. They eat all this seafood, and then they poop on the land. And so there's all this guano and, all these nutrients that help the plants to grow. And so they're very essential for the health of the islands. And so this is in the morning, go there early morning. There's a flyby of all kinds of interesting stuff. These are brown boobies. And here's some red-footeds. A little higher up, sooty terns. There's another island off of Kaneohe on Oahu, Mokomanu Bird Island, where there's 11 species of seabirds nest here. And if you do the infamous road to Hana, right before you get to Hana, there's a really nice black beach. And it's a really easy place to see black noddies. And they call them noddies because they do this kind of nodding display, nuptial display. And they're kind of interesting birds to see. There's brown noddies and black noddies. These next ones, I haven't seen any of these. The next few species, they all actually nest in the ground and are for the most part nocturnal. So they can be a little bit hard to see. The dark-rumped petrel nested on all main islands. Now they're kind of limited. There's a few on the Big Island, and there's some up on Haleakala on Maui. And they have a lot of problems. A lot of these species have trouble with lights, and they get disoriented because they use the moon and stars to navigate. And so human lights, particularly with young birds, can cause a lot of problems. These shearwaters, about 1,000 of them are recovered and released every year because they get distracted by lights and end up crashing on the ground. And people actually bring them in, and there's these stations, and they can, rehab them and then let them go. So this is another one here again. They're very vulnerable, since they nest in the ground. So cats have, once a cat or a cat colony, finds some of these colonies of birds, they can really create havoc. So here's some more. And so a little bit more about the translocation, the moving birds. The group that does it is the Pacific Rim Conservation, and they began about 6 years ago, and there's 6 species that they're working with. And here again, the 2011 earthquake in Japan, when it hit the Northwest Islands, actually affected about half the nests of the seabirds on Midway and Kure. And so, that's pretty disastrous. So they're trying to get other colonies in other places that are a little higher. So they will actually, pick up the birds when they're fairly young, fly them in a private jet, and then they have to feed them for, several months in the new location to imprint them on that place. And then the albatross in particular take off and won't come back for 3 to 5 years. So, and then they have nesting boxes for them. I'm not sure particularly what these were used for. This was actually on Oahu. And if you're really interested in seabirds, there's an annual meeting. I happened to be in Kauai, and the meeting was at the hotel where I was staying. So I actually went to a few of the groups and talked to people. And here again, a lot of people doing a lot of good work to to protect the seabirds. And they're just fascinating birds, their life stories. So here's an interesting habitat. This is a photo I took out of a plane of one of the densest cities in North America, Honolulu, and the densest island. There's about 1 million people that live on Oahu. But downtown in these non-native trees, there's a bird that back in the 60s started nesting. And they actually put these bands around the trees because they do a lot of tree trimming. It takes a lot to maintain paradise there in Hawaii. But these white terns actually nest on a bare branch up in these non-native trees right in the heart of downtown Honolulu. And like I said, they started about 1961. And as of 2016, there were 2,300 birds that they censused in downtown Honolulu. And here again, most people do not even know they're there. Somebody, cued me into them. And so if you go wandering around, if you look in the lower left, you can see the bird poop. So if you see bird poop on the sidewalk, it's either a pigeon or it could be a white tern. And the arrow is up at a white tern up in the tree, which is right in the center of this photo. Just right on one of the busiest streets in downtown Honolulu. So here again, some birds can adapt and do fairly well. It's not a rare species. They're actually fairly common in a lot of the islands around the Pacific. This was a pair that was actually displaying out over the ocean, obviously a little too far for my camera, but. So some other birds, of course, a lot of the people know the nene, the state bird of Hawaii, named for their call that they make, nene. These are probably Canada geese that started evolving maybe 500,000 years ago and have a few minor adaptations. They have the lei around their neck, to make them fit in there in Hawaii, and a couple other things. They basically act like Canada geese. When you see them, they'll hiss at you. They hang out on golf courses. I'm sure they poop everywhere, and they were rare when I first went to Hawaii back in '87. They were hard to find. On Kauai, they're doing well because there's no mongoose, but other islands, they still have, any ground nesting bird has a lot of problems. So, and you can see on their feet, they're losing some of their webbing, and they're also apparently getting tougher feet to walk on the lava. So there is, a little bit of adaptation that they're undergoing here. You can see he doesn't have any primary feathers, so he's obviously molting at this time. And there's a number of extinct. Actually, the only one that's still alive is the nene on the right. The rest of them are birds that went extinct, probably shortly after the Polynesians arrived. These were probably pretty good eating, just like the moa on New Zealand. One of the things with birds is they get larger and they get flightless on islands because there really aren't predators. And so, so this, there were quite a few other waterfowl and other birds. There's a real interesting book on the extinct birds of Hawaii that it says that, let me see if I can even read this here. The islands had 77 bird species and subspecies extinction, accounting for 15% of the global bird extinctions during the last 700 years. So, so there were a lot of birds at various times on Hawaii and a lot of the other Polynesian islands as well. There's a really interesting place you can go on Kauai, and I really recommend this tour. It's an archaeology tour, but this is part of it. I mean, you go to a lot of the native Polynesian sites, which are really fascinating as well. You go with bona fide archaeologists who really know their stuff. But this is a rare limestone sinkhole on a igneous island. It's rare to get limestone. But they did a lot of digging here. There's 10,000 years of sediment in this sinkhole. And so they found the remains of 40 different bird species, half of which are now extinct. And here again, these weren't technically fossils because they weren't mineralized, but it's interesting, the history. There's a whole book on just this, what's called, they call paleoecology. And so it's interesting, what birds were there. And here again, they're finding more and more birds in like old sand dunes and things like that. They're finding a lot of bones. And so there's a lot of other birds that, for some reason or other end up on Hawaii. You wonder what they're doing and whether they find their way back and how many didn't make it. But snow goose, regular there, white-fronted goose, black brant. Here again, none of these nest there. Pintails, shovelers, all kinds of ducks show up there. 37 species of waterfowl have been recorded as winter visitors in Hawaii. And then there's two other ducks that are interesting and rare. The Laysan duck, which is only on Laysan Island, which is in the middle of the northwestern chain. There's maybe 500 of these left. And these were in the Honolulu Zoo. It's the reason I got this picture. I didn't go out to Laysan Island, but a very unique duck. And then the Hawaiian duck, which is an endangered endemic. And here again, I don't know the whole story of these, but it is considered a separate species, and Kauai is the easiest place to see them. The problem is they interbreed with mallards, as many other ducks do. And so a lot of what you see on some of the other islands are hybrids. The Hawaiian duck was extirpated and reestablished on several of the islands. But here again, the mallards, who are believed to be descendants of feral domestic stock, have interbred with them. So the black-crowned night heron, here's a juvenile. They're fairly common. Haven't really evolved much, so it's the same species we have. Gulls show up, although here again, gulls are not seagulls. They really don't like open oceans. They really like coastlines and inlands much better. But regular winter visitors, they don't breed there. And then the Hawaiian coot, which actually was thought to be a subspecies, was given full species status in 1993. This is one that has a white knob on there. This is one that has a red shield on it. So you can see both. And when the Polynesians arrived, a lot of the lowlands, they brought a couple dozen what they call canoe plants. And one of the important ones was taro. And so a lot of the wetlands in the lower elevations was taken up by taro cultivation. And it's not really incompatible with a lot of birds. There's a lot of the native birds that can still live in these areas. Here again, this is on Kauai. The Hawaiian duck, the Hawaiian stilt, the Hawaiian gallinule, and the Hawaiian coots can all live in these areas. In the common moorhen or gallinule is culturally important. It's thought to bring fire from the gods for the Hawaiians with the red plate on there. not unlike a lot of Native American stories from the mainland of woodpecker and the idea of fire theft and bringing fire to humans. So, so a culturally important bird, the moorhen. And of course, stilts, this is an endangered endemic subspecies. You can see it's a little darker than our black-necked stilt. And it's the Aeo, which means one standing tall in Hawaiian. Here's a female and a male. The female's a little browner. Some dowitchers in the background there. So the most common shorebirds that you get on the islands are the kolea, the Pacific golden plover, the turnstones, sanderlings, and tattlers. So you should see all these if you go there in the wintertime. And here again, it's pretty amazing that these birds fly all the way to Hawaii. But the koleas are fairly common and on all the islands and just very fun to watch. They return to the same territory in the winter and apparently on the breeding grounds and are very territorial with other birds. Even with my camera and my kind of minimal skills, you can get decent pictures of the plovers. And these will also, there was a couple out at Fern Ridge this winter, so they come through there as well. So they, the ones that go to Hawaii nest up in Alaska, and so it's about a 3,000-mile nonstop journey that might take 3 to 4 days to go to Hawaii, and a lot of them go even further. So it's just amazing the journeys that some of these birds make. And one of the things that they talk about, the reason that the Polynesians knew there were other islands is they would watch birds fly, and they knew that they were going somewhere. And so they would follow them, as much as they could, and actually find new islands. So it's interesting culturally, the significance of the shorebirds as well. Here's an arrow pointing to a kolea that has a really interesting little territory right in the middle of a parking lot. And here's two in a standoff. They, like I said, they're very territorial. This is the kind of the edges of two territories here. And since they banned them, they know that the same ones show up on the same territories every year. Of course, turnstones, tattlers. The sanderlings are interesting, just the Hawaiian name, Hunakai, which means sea foam, because if you watch the sanderlings, on a beach, it looks like a wave coming in, with sea foam in it. So, some of the Hawaiian names for birds are really interesting. So 44 species of migratory shorebirds have been recorded in the Hawaiian Islands. Almost all are Arctic breeders, and many arrive in immature or winter plumage. And of course, no stop to anywhere birding is complete without visiting the sewage treatment plant, for the distinctive aromas. And in this one, there was a rare bird that was here. And so we had to skirt way around, and there were some really cool spiders there as well. So, for you newer birders, there's all kinds of interesting treats in birding. These spiders I thought were beautiful. The friends that I was with were less than interested, but here again, they're harmless. So it was a marsh sandpiper that was at the sewage treatment ponds. This is on the Big Island. And so just like the Pribilovs or the Aleutians or Gamble, unusual shorebirds and unusual birds in general will periodically show up. So there's always something interesting to look for. And one that's regular and somewhat common is the bristle-thighed curlew. They're on a number of the islands in wintertime, but Oahu is the easiest place to see them. There's a golf course you can go to see them. That's where I took this picture, or go to the James Campbell National Wildlife Refuge, where there's maybe 800 to 1,000 that nest, or that winter on the Hawaiian Islands. And a few subadults actually stay all year, but they're fairly common, just kind of wandering around. And here again, heavily studied. They have, bands and numbers and all this. So they breed up in Alaska in two different sites. There may be 7,000 of them, which is not a lot. And they're vulnerable on their wintering grounds because they're one of the only shorebirds that actually goes through a flightless molt where they drop all their feathers and they're flightless. So they're really vulnerable. And their nesting grounds up in Alaska were not just discovered until 1948. They knew the bird, from finding them on the Pacific Islands, but they didn't know where they went because they're in pretty hidden locations up in Alaska in the tundra. So here again, they have an incredible long flight. Some of them go to Hawaii and some of them go even beyond Hawaii. And so the best place to go, like I said, is the James Campbell National Wildlife Refuge. It's 160 acres of wetlands. It's only open on 2 days a week for very brief periods from October through February. So you really have to check, and it's only open, the gates are only open for about 10 minutes. You have to go on an official tour if you want to go there, but it's well worth it. They have really good volunteer guides, and there's a lot to see there. They also have 16 fenced off acres for translocated laysan and black-footed albatross there. So it's a very important refuge. And like I say, these are a couple of the volunteer naturalists that were leading the hikes. And the guy in the front, Kurt, was very helpful. Any bird I was interested in, he would give me detailed instructions on where to find it on Oahu. So it always pays to talk to the locals if you're interested in finding a particular bird. And here again, the islands are fairly small. So if you're there for long enough, you should be able to at least have a shot at seeing a lot of the birds you want to see. So this is just a picture of part of the refuge here. There's stilts and turnstones, dowitchers, sanderlings. And then there's a couple of raptors, the Hawaiian hawk, and it's endangered. The population is fairly stable, but there are some problems, and they're only on the Big Island. They're related to the short-tailed hawk. And there's two color morphs. This is a dark one. I took this photo. I didn't take this, and this is a light morph. This one I obviously took. This is a pueo, or the short-eared owl, which is an endemic subspecies. And they feed on rodents. And so the thinking is they may be a recent arrival after the Polynesians arrived and brought rats, that they became more widespread on the islands. But here again, they are declining for a number of reasons. And they're also considered an ancestral guardian spirit that protects and guides. So it's important culturally to protect them. This is a better picture of one by Carrie on the Saddle Road on the Big Island. You can see they're a little bit darker than the ones we have here. Unfortunately, barn owls are great, here, and I know Louise is watching and has way too many of these right now. But they were really a bad introduction on Hawaii. They of course introduced them to eat rodents, which they do, but they also eat native birds, especially the nocturnal seabirds. So bad introduction, and they also compete with the native pueo. So there they are. So I thought I'd take a little volcano break here and just show you some pictures. This is the Halemaumau crater in the Kilauea caldera. And when I was there in 2017, it was really active. And this is the way you take photos of things. You turn your back on it and get a selfie stick and say, I was here. So it's interesting. There's also white-tailed tropic birds just right in the crater here. They nest in a nearby crater on some of the ledges. But it was really active. Now all this lava has kind of sunk. But when I was there, Kilauea was really active. And so this is like a small crater within the larger caldera. And here's a little film of what it looks like. Just a giant crater. And you can actually walk out there if you want, as long as you don't get too close to the caldera, because the other active part of it is actually in a different area. But here again, active volcanoes, poor air quality. This is Mark Twain. The smell of sulfur is strong, but not unpleasant to a sinner. So he actually was there as a correspondent for 4 months in the 1860s. Here again, in some places, it really is pretty bad. it kind of burns your nose and your lungs. And so you have to, be sort of careful. This is actually coming down off the saddle road towards Kona. And you can see along there the level of what they call VOG. VOG is sulfur dioxide reacting with oxygen and moisture in the presence of sunlight. And so Kilauea emits a lot of sulfur dioxide. So you get this VOG. And ironically, it's actually on the Kona coast, which is kind of the wealthier coast. So this is from the saddle road. And then this is looking up at Mauna Kea, and this is VOG here as well. So here again, Kilauea quit for a while, but now it's active again. So lots of flows, many modern flows. I actually rented a bike and rode out, a bunch of miles to look at some of this. This is kind of some recent Pohoihoi lava. And I like this, here again, this is people whose houses, are under this lava, but the surveyor came out and so they're rebuilding, right on bare lava. Some, fairly decent homes. So here again, it's not paradise. There's, just all kinds of dangers and warnings in Hawaii. I always thought they needed another addition to all these signs that say, have a nice day. Even just, kind of minding your own business sitting under a coconut tree, it's just not safe there. So and then of course, they do have tsunamis, so they have tsunami warning systems, and you have to worry about the occasional North Korean missile that might come over as well. So let me see. I'll talk a little bit about there's a lot of stuff that Polynesians brought with them. Like I said, canoe plants. They brought taro, breadfruit, coconut palm, sugar canes, bananas, sweet potatoes. And they also brought pigs, dogs, chickens, and rats, which caused a lot of problems for the birds. So I'll talk a little bit about the non-native species and see if I can go through this pretty quick. Pigs are one of the worst introductions. There were Polynesian pigs and European pigs as well. And apparently it's kind of a mixed gene pool of both running wild on all the islands now. Goats, here again, will eat everything, released by Captain Cook way back. Sheep, and they've even released mouflon, which is a kind of sheep that breeds with the domestic sheep. They introduced black-tailed deer from Oregon for some reason in 1960. Now there's 700 in Waimea Canyon on Kauai. Even pronghorn antelope. There's a really sad story about releasing pronghorn antelope. And of course, the biggest one, cattle. There's some huge ranches. Actually, before there were big ranches in Texas and in the mainland Southwest, there was big ranches on Hawaii. And it's a really interesting backstory for another time. But they're all over the place. And this is what, I like this quote, Hawaii is feeding its forest to escape barnyard animals. So this is what, a lot of Hawaii looks like with cattle and goats and sheep and various other ungulates. This is what I would kind of prefer it to look like. I'm kind of in the camp of Edward Abbey when it comes to cattle. So we have the cattle-dominated Hawaii and the more native Hawaii. Mongoose is a bad introduction. They'll eat all kinds of stuff. They were supposed to eat the rats, but they don't. And so they eat a lot of birds and other stuff. And of course, rats, a big problem. You can see rat traps all over the place, mongoose traps. And then cats. Introduced really early, according to the American Bird Conservancy, the #1 threat to birds in North America. In the US, they kill 2.4 billion birds every year. That's with a B. They can also spread toxoplasmosis. Apparently 3/4 of all cats have this. It affects the nene, the Hawaiian crow. It's actually killed monk seals, and it also affects humans in sublethal and lethal doses. So, the cute little kitties, if they're outside, really wreak havoc. So if you have a cat, keep it indoors. Unfortunately, there's a lot of cats on the Hawaiian Islands. And I like this quote, feral cats on islands have contributed to the extinction of 63 species of birds, mammals, and reptiles, according to the American Bird Conservancy. and they're a principal threat to 8% of critically endangered birds and reptiles. And the trap, neuter, release doesn't work to reduce cat populations. They estimate that there's 500,000 just on Maui. So yeah, enough said. Ants, no native ants. Ants are a problem for ground nesting birds. So we'll take a breath after all that depressing stuff. Sorry to be such a gloomy Gus, but you know, islands are interesting for so many reasons. So I'll run through a few of the introduced birds and then we'll call it a night. This is interesting. These condos I stayed in, this was the grill out area. And so do they have a, you know, an albatross or a honey creeper? No, they have a common myna and a bird of paradise, you know, an introduced plant and an introduced bird. But this is probably, you know, what most people see. So, so many bird species have been introduced intentionally, maybe as many as 150. Or as escaped cage birds, 50 to 60 species have become naturalized. So Hawaii is also the introduced bird capital of the world. They have the highest density of introduced birds because here again, a lot of the native birds died off. And it was, you know, here again, well-meaning, you know, government agencies, you know, for insect control or recreational hunting, various acclimatization societies in the 20s and 30s and 40s introduced birds because there just weren't birds singing, you know, down in the lower elevations where people were. So they wanted to revivify our forest with the bright plumage and mellifluent songs of these little people of the forest. So this is the ladies of the acclimatization society with some cage birds they're about to release. And actually there's a really good book I can recommend, Belonging on an Island. And it talks about a lot of this and other things. But the premise is what belongs on an island? You know, everything comes from somewhere else. And it's a very good read. It's a little too detailed in certain places, but has a lot of good information if you're interested in Hawaiian ornithology or birds in general. So common myna, the most common bird, introduced to control armyworms and cutworms in the sugarcane fields. Here again, you know, they could be honey creepers in another 500,000 years or so. Spotted doves, barred ground dove. Here's actually a melanistic zebra dove. And this is a male courting a female. I mean, they're cute little birds and there wouldn't be any birds for anyone to see in the lower elevations if they weren't introduced. Canaries, rice birds, manakins, munia. House finches are interesting because some of them are red and some of them are yellow. Some of them aren't getting the carotenoids on Hawaii. They aren't finding the caterpillars that actually have carotenoids in them. That's another whole story, but there's interesting papers on that. There's one I found that some guy wrote, but you can see those there. Java sparrow, which is actually a finch, which are cavity nesters. Silverbill, a lot of cage birds, common waxbills. These are really cute. You can see why they introduced them. Cute little pairs. Bulbuls. Unfortunately, these are fruit eaters, so they're an agricultural pest. So there's red-vented and the red-whiskered on Oahu. Unfortunately, you can't find the native. There's two native butterflies. And the last 3 times I went, I intentionally looked for both and couldn't find either one. But there are 20 introduced butterflies that you can find fairly easily, including this one. Finches, which is the saffron finch, is actually a tanager. The yellow-billed cardinal, also a tanager. This is a real cardinal, the red-crested cardinal, and of course the cardinal we're familiar with. That's pretty common there. Shamas, these are really pretty singers and fairly tame. They're kind of cute birds that you can see. Skylarks, good singers, kind of hard to photograph, for me at least, they're kind of far away. Meadowlarks on Kauai. Mockingbirds, unfortunately, they're nest predators. The melodious laughing thrush. These are common little birds. They're cute. And then these guys are probably one of the most common introduced birds too. The warbling or Japanese white-eye. And they actually may pollinate some widowed endemic flowers where the native bird has died. And they also may compete with native birds. So it's kind of a mixed blessing with these guys. And who knows, you know, you can always dream, you know, you can be a house sparrow that, you know, wanting to be a beautiful Hawaiian honeycreeper. Of course, you know, the cage birds, you have to have the parrots and parakeets. There's quite a few of those there. This is an evening sunset watch here. As soon as the sun went down, you know, all the pairs of parakeets came in. These came from, you know, like maybe just a very small group that escaped from a bed and breakfast in the 60s. And now there's 5,000 and they're a big agricultural pest on Kauai. So they're pretty birds, but yeah, people don't like them for various reasons. And then of course, the Polynesians brought the red jungle fowl, which if you're on Kauai, since there's no mongoose, they're everywhere. And these are probably normal looking jungle fowl, but there's a lot of escaped ones that interbreed. So you get some very colorful ones. You get speckled ones, really speckled ones. You get red ones, really red ones, white ones, black ones, white and black ones, whatever this is. And they're all over. Yeah, it was kind of fun just to see how many I could photograph there on Kauai. And it's, you know, because people feed them, and here again, free range chickens. Of course, turkeys were introduced. A lot of this was for hunting, pheasants, fancier pheasants, peacocks, not necessarily for hunting, but just for, and they're actually countable on Hawaii. They've been there for so long. They were introduced in 1860, so they're considered a naturalized bird. Francolins, gray francolins who like to talk in the morning. They're basically chickens. Urkel's francolin, the black francolin, which is very secretive, but has a very distinctive call that you can hear. Sand grouse. Egrets, unfortunately, here again to control insect pests, but they also prey on water birds and compete for food. Here's one eating a non-native anole lizard. Of course, they have to hang out with the cattle if they're cattle egrets in large roosts. Of course, I was talking to one landscaper there, and he said they should call them lawnmower egrets, because every time he turns on his lawnmower, the cattle egrets descend to see what insects or lizards that they might stir up. And so I'll end with just a few things. Hawaii wants to reach 100% renewable energy by 2045. So there's a lot of wind energy there. Traditionally, they generated most of their electricity from high-priced oil and coal that have to be shipped in. Obviously, solar works really well there. You see just a lot of rooftop solar, you know, on stores, condos, houses, everywhere. And here again, since sugar cane is no longer king there, all the mills are closed now. Those fields are nice and flat and actually make good solar farms. So, yeah, this is one that had just opened up on Kauai. So I'll end with a few pretty pictures of the waterfalls and things. Really nice, some native vegetation here. So there's still some beautiful places left on Hawaii and some interesting birds to see. And there's even the Grand Canyon of the Pacific on Kauai, Waimea Canyon. Lots of good beaches, of course. And so thank you for joining me. And if we still have time, I'd be glad to answer some questions. So I'll let Debbie handle that.
If anybody has any questions, speak up or just type your question into the chat and we'll get them read to Rick.
Give Rick a big hand while everybody's here to appreciate his wonderful presentation. Thank you, Rick.
Hey, thank you very much, Rick.
Thank you.
Glad to do it. I learned a lot just preparing it, and so I'm happy to share it.
When are you going back?
You know, I like summer here, and it's not a great time to be in Hawaii. So you know, maybe next winter.
That's the best time to go. We used to go in January.
Yeah, January, February is a really good time to be there, and not here.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rick. This was really wonderful. Great
Yeah.
job.
Thank you so much, Rick. Fantastic. Loved
Yeah. Hey, Bonnie.
it.
Yeah, such a nice, comprehensive explanation of so many things. I really appreciated it. Gave me so many fond memories.
Oh, good. Yeah, I mean, here again, it's so interesting. I mean, it's easily a 2 or 3 hour presentation if I would have gone into more detail. So that's always my fear is just going too long. But yeah, it's so much fun to put together and you know, learn so much. You know, the more you study, the deeper you can go with a lot of interesting things. And I didn't even mention a lot of the cultural stuff. So.
Yeah, absolutely be wonderful.
Yeah, wonderful.
And there's several good books. The one on the left here, Hawaii's Birds, is kind of essential. It's put out by the Audubon Society and is now in the 7th edition. It's great. I used a lot of information from that in my presentation. The one on the right is a good one as well. Let me see. This is the other one I mentioned, Belonging on an Island. And then there's a lot of good environmental organizations to support. American Bird Conservancy does a lot of work all over the place, but particularly they have a lot of good stuff in Hawaii, Pacific Rim Conservation, Maui Forest Bird Recovery Project, Kauai Forest Bird Recovery Project, Nature Conservancy is great, doing a lot of good stuff, Hawaii Audubon. So here again, you know, there's a lot of good groups to support. You can actually go over and volunteer with some groups if you're, you know, healthy and able and want to spend a week or 2 over there, you know, maybe helping out, you know, replanting some forests or doing something like that. You might check with some of the environmental organizations. So here again, lots of opportunities to, you know, to see things and maybe help out a little bit.
Mavis too shy to say this herself, but she did a lot of volunteer work for the Hawaii Audubon Society when she was there.
Oh, good for you. What did you do, Mayor?
I did a few different things with them, but one sort of memorable thing I did was present a presentation for the state legislature, and I actually wore a dress and, you know, dressed up and acted like I knew what I was talking about. I was well primed by a biologist who gave me lots of information, so gave me a foot in the door as far as conservation work was concerned. And you know, you hope you can make a difference, but there's a lot of forces that work, as you know, in Hawaii: land and money, scant land and lots of money. So
Yeah.
Hey, I'll just remind people that we are recording this, and I will take the recording and put it on YouTube, and we'll put the link to that recording on the website for Lane County Audubon, and I think on the Facebook page. So if you have friends that missed this and will want to see it again, or if you want to see it again, look at our webpage in a couple of days, and we'll have that link for you.
That's good. Thank you, Dennis.
And there's also past talks that are on there as well. And a lot of organizations actually are recording their talks, and you can go back, you know, and watch some interesting presentations.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was really great to have everybody here tonight. Charlie Quinn, I enjoyed your comments coming through periodically. Thank you. I'm good to see so many familiar faces, and we hope everybody has a wonderful summer and stays healthy and gets to enjoy the beautiful summer weather. Now that we've had some rain, we might enjoy it a little longer.
Yes.
Rick, thank
Okay,
you
thank you
again.
again. Thank you again, Rick.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Rick.
Oh, you're very welcome. Mahalo.
Yes.
Okay.
Mahalo to you. Good
Thank-
night, everybody.
Good night.
Right.